what I'm doing qualifies as sepia. It's not red, it's not brown, it's somewhere in between. This is part of my issue with toning, is I want to make sure that whatever I'm doing, I can just barely get into the tone of the paper and not get really dark. And so I was trying to select something. This one is a Conté, but it is not Conté crayon, it is a Conté Pastel Pencil. And this one would be a number 1355, also called a number 19, or maybe the line is 1355. You see these on eBay all the time. And it just seemed like if I was going to get anything that would have just about the right kind of temperature, it would be this. Now, you can also see from my tone, it's a bit darker. I'm really referring to the extensive use of the pastel sticks in a lot of practices where a person's going to have a gigantic spread of really super soft pastels, and suddenly they've got pastel all over their hands, and you can see as they draw with it. This is one of the big things when you draw with a stick pastel and it starts to rain down and you see somebody reach in and they go aerosolizes all of that. That's a bigger health risk than oil paint's ever going to be, in my opinion. I want you to know that as you're drawing on a toned piece of paper, that you want to be sensitive to the tone in the form of your erasing. My go-to material for taking my pastel out is going to be my chamois. You do not want to use an eraser on this. You have to use a chamois. And someone's always coming in to class and they say, well, I forgot my chamois. And I say, well, go to the art store right now and buy one, because you're not using a pencil eraser. You're going to get rid of your watercolor. If you're on Fabriano, it's already pre-toned. Use a pencil eraser all you want. But on this stuff, you can't do that. As a matter of fact, you'll see as you're erasing with the chamois, you will see how the chamois will pick up watercolor tone as you work the page. The paper won't give you infinite opportunities to erase it. You just get a few, which is kind of fun in a way. It seems like it matches okay, right? My only issue is going to be my capacity to do sight size. I was never trained in that, and I find it a challenge to even pull from one side to the other. I know sight size is like gospel in certain circles, and I do want to know how to do it. I don't really want to practice it too much because I don't think ultimately it's the way I want to engage, but I'd like to be a good enough instructor that I could slip into alternate ways of working, and one of those certainly is sight size. I remember I was demonstrating years ago at GCA of all places. I'd gone back there on invitation to demo, and I couldn't get any word out of the crowd. I would ask them as I was drawing about this or about that. It was like crickets, tough crowd. And so I said, what do you guys think about sight sizing? And then it was just like the floodgates opened and everybody, because they all had problems with it, but what it made for was a really lively discussion. And what I'm getting at by saying that is, in some ateliers, they treat it like gospel, as I said, but in others, they don't like it one bit. And so it's worth talking about to see if you want to use it, at least as a training module. The idea is replicating the scale, which is part of what people are trying to get at when they talk about hand-eye coordination anyway. They're attempting to read and adequately transpose the information from one side to the other. I usually try to do that with the characteristics of gesture, because I feel like gesture is a lot like caricature, is a lot like getting the appealing aspects that you'd see in somebody's face. I think caricaturists are really good at that. When you walk around in a park or in an amusement park and you see somebody going after a caricature, I feel like there's something about the gesture that they're getting in that which I've always found intriguing. I don't remember seeing a lot about sight sizing in the history of the academic practice, nor any of it for that matter. It seems like it's a 20th century invention to try to force the procedure to be even more discipline-oriented. You might as well be a map maker or a surveyor. I had heard people that were in that circle, like they desperately wanted to learn it, and I would see them when they would come to do a workshop or something like that, and they would complain not about the technique, but they'd complain about their own physical endurance, because like if you changed your posture the slightest bit, every line would go off because it was all tied to the same constellation. You imagine like having to be so fixated on your own posture that you can't get the drawing accurate, and you can't loosen up, and you can't enjoy yourself in a certain way. You can't find your own physical rhythm. It's a good way to put it, right? A physical rhythm. That's what you're always trying to find, in addition to a mental rhythm. I don't know if it was Gamel that really pushed it, but it may well have been. I'd have to go back into Twilight of Painting and see, because Twilight of Painting is more of a manifesto than it is a how-to book reintroducing the atelier system, as sometimes it's made out to be. Gamel talks a lot about the convergence of the schools of form making and color, and how we're in a new day, like a new era or a new age. And it reads really well until you get to Gamel's legacy, driven into the contemporary age by a person named Richard Lack. And it may have been Lack that really pushed it, I don't know. Well, I put together a panel of experts, folks that had been really trained in the Gamel-Lack school, because what I had run across in discourse with people about education was what I was reading as an overly enthusiastic attribution to the Florence Academy as the instigator, the originator of the contemporary modern atelier system. But to me, the atelier system really was extended through the Gamel-Lack lineage, because Lack studies with Gamel. Gamel writes his book in 1946, Twilight of Painting, and I think it's that really that brought in, directly or indirectly, the resurgence through Florence Academy. So what I was trying to do with the panel was to investigate that and to see if there was a way that we could offer like an enriching appreciation of what the atelier system, where it came from and what it was trying to accomplish. As you work the page, to do sight size, I don't feel like it fits all that well with this rigor, in the sense that the rigor eventually builds up your own disposition, the strength of your mind, your self-reliance, and sight-sizing just seems like an inherently self-doubting practice to always assume you have to go back and plot points. And to what end? What if you plot the point and it still doesn't look right? Well, you got to question sometimes. I'm going to want to question that mouth, and what if I could interpret it in a different way? If I'm sight-sizing, then I'm beholden to the image as though it's a photograph. And I guess I could employ that word again, gospel. You don't want to have an image that you don't have a dialogue with, if that makes any sense. I think I would probably, as I said, learn, because there are examples of sight sizing occasionally that you do without knowing, and if you don't learn how to do it, at least in principle and theory, you may fall victim to accidentally doing it without knowing that you're doing it. But also, you'll be able to more thoroughly dedicate yourself to the philosophy that you do believe in, because you're aware of alternate ways of engaging, and you'll be free to disagree with those and apply your own standards to the way that you work. Yeah, it's like a shell or something, an outer shell of what you're trying to penetrate into, and your technique has prevented you from connecting with that inner essence. I don't have a very dark pastel pencil on purpose, because I'm not interested in trying to do surgery in here and dig out a misunderstanding or a miscommunication of a mark. The idea isn't to make a perfect drawing, it's to have a system that can allow you to go in there and organically fulfill your expectations for what you're searching for. You're really after this unique way that everything is threaded together. And by saying that, again, I'm reminded of that notion of couching coming from embroidery. Couching is the idea of steeping your marks in a fizzy system. If something is already kinetic, then it's a lot more inviting, again, to use that word, to jump in there and play around with. So I'm going to let my eye just swim around for a little while and see if I can tap into the longer curvilinear networks, and I think that will be a far more effective tool than sight sizing. I think sometimes there's a notion in studying academically or classically that it has to be impossibly difficult and painful and wrenching. And I don't think that is the case. And I believe in the fundamental necessity of gesture. And gesture is a very invigorating and exciting thing. It affirms beauty and humanity because you're looking at the figure and pose and beholding just how awesome the human body can be when it's full of an innate expression, when it's animated in pose. Your gesture is like a grid or something. And that's why in thinking about replicating the scale, which is what we're trying to do in sight sizing, is repeat the scale as well as the position. You know, like this level, which isn't right. You can see mine is higher than that. But that would go back to the notion in the early part of tonight's discussion that you try to simplify a lot of the complexity so you can focus on certain things. And if you simplify the whole question of rescaling, then you can focus more on the mark making. That makes your life a little bit easier. It makes the exercise more clear. I'm working in not only a lighter passage as I talked about, but I've also not sharpened it. And so as the drawing goes on and on, the mark making will tend toward or lean more toward shape making than it will linear placement. That's a pretty important thing to mention, I think, because as you lay out your marks, you want to be very purposeful about why the tip you have, what is its function. It's going to be more natural for me to veer more toward pattern making and shape building, especially now that I've been on this for a few minutes, and the longer I'm on it, the less subjectively I can probably see it because I want it to be accurate, I want it to be solid, and I want it to be ready. And I also don't want it to be, and this is probably going to segue into a different point, I don't want to be so perfect in the execution that I am averse to touching the drawing. And that brings up another interesting question and a reason to have a discussion like this, which is how far do you take X image, whatever image we are talking about, before you decide it's ready for further development. An example by way of relation would be me moving to a darker material, which I'm going to. If I get it too perfect, which believe me, I'm not going to be able to do that. If I get it too perfect, then in a way it gets kind of limited. So couching is a great way to prevent it from solidifying at this stage in a way that it becomes, in a sense, resistant or gets far worse when you add the additional material. Be mindful of the modest size of most of these master drawings. And here's the one that we related to earlier. You're playing around not only with the scale, because I didn't think this was very inviting to draw into. It's just too small. But you're also playing around with the alternate temperature. And you see how the temperature shifts over to an orange? Is that showing up on camera? That's another aspect of this which is kind of curious and wild and interesting. This to me looked like an earth violet drawing. It's different here. You see I'm pursuing a strange orangey color. I may decide to go into something because I could shift red now or I could shift violet now. I'll look at it and see which way I want to go, but I need something to go darker and even to just re-articulate and solidify what's going on. That's something I wanted to mention. So this size is 26 centimeters by about 38 centimeters, just under 40 centimeters. We'll do inches as well. I've become such a fan of centimeters. Of the golden section, all of the geometry stuff that we do doesn't work at all in inches. It only works in centimeters. About 15 and a quarter / 15 and a half tall and 10-ish wide. 10 by 15. I think if you're working 10 by 15, you're kind of covered for most old master drawings, dare I say. And that gets you into even more stuff. I may wind up regretting that I enlarged this scale, but at the current state of affairs, I don't feel like I did anything that I'm going to live to regret, because to me a pencil about this size seems well suited to the scale at hand. Whereas if I were to go over to here, and speaking of zygomatic or something, a pencil at this scale, which doesn't necessarily look all that different, but if you notice the tips here, the tip on the one on the right is a lot smaller than the tip on the one on the left. So this one is more conducive to larger size marks, you see. And I would advise you, if you're doing a drawing of this sort and you have some pastel pencils, you might want to get a double set so you could make a thick tip and then a thinner tip. I've always liked the pastel pencils a lot because I like the firmness of them and I like the way they handle on papers like this one. Everybody's different, so you may not like them, so try them out. If you don't, that's fine. Use something else that you would be tuned into, like the Cretacolor. Cretacolor is going to be more crayon-y. That's fine too. We're talking about an artist that has some pretty shrill mark making. If I hold that up, I've been going through images, things that I could copy for you or I thought might work, might not work, and this was like a first runner-up. And I regard this as very shrill, it's very cutting, it's very biting, and I think his mark making is more fuzzy here, fascinatingly fuzzy. A lot of it's going to depend on how I can read the interaction between his marks on this warmer paper, which looks like straight up Conté, versus this slightly colder paper with something that feels a lot like it's melting into the page. I can't quite find the wording, but you can see that there's a different sense. I think shrill captures it here because it does look louder, and here it looks quieter. So I have to find a quieter material that'll help me see that. Now we're in a different place. We're talking about serious drawing because you're dedicating yourself to something that's going to go a lot further down the road toward providing the fidelity of mark that you're after, because you're searching for a real character, real flair, and a personality to the way you wield the substance. And it's far more within reach in this complex page because of the way it's woven, because of the tone that you created on top of it, because of its unique textural characteristics. It's a different thing for sure. But that's why we went with the Fabriano, was to start that out. You could cut your teeth on the feel of the materials with that Fabriano because you don't have to worry about how delicate, how temperamental the page is going to be, which it certainly is in this case. You're also going to be aware that if you switch over to something that's more oily here, in a way it's going to be fixing the pastel into the page, graining it or ingraining it into the fibers of the paper, as the case may be. It would be a good opportunity to, explore some of those creative options, as well as some other things that we'd be looking forward to planning out to continue our work together. I'm finding it interesting, and it's just a kind of cool thing to organize new ideas, things that, we've done a lot, all of us have done a lot together, and a lot of what seems to really be fulfilling are the experiments, the things that you don't necessarily know if they're going to work out, generally work out really well, and I'm just not the kind of individual that wants to do the same thing over and over again, which is why we're always trying to figure things out and take a new angle on information and training and education. A lot of it happens through history and things like that. And so yeah, I think it's going to be a cool thing. It's a bit tough at times when the conveyor belt of action just continues to run, so that's why I think it's a good thing to take a breather. All right?